All right, we are live here. Chicago Jazz Magazine, ChicagoJazz.com, Chicago Music Revealed. Mike Jeffers here. Oh, I got to hit the theme song here. Here we go. There it is. So hopefully everybody had a great weekend, and I am very pleased to tell you that this is episode 21. We are picking up steam here. Obviously, I did 150 episodes of Talking Jazz. When the whole quarantine situation happened, we shifted gears a little bit, dialed it down into a daily music show that we have now, which is now this Chicago Music Revealed, which means that we're revealing Chicago music to the world and also revealing national and international artists to our audience here in Chicago. But obviously, because this is streaming live online, it's going throughout the entire world. And everyone is seeing this. So this is great. We're picking up steam every day. As I always say, as you're listening to this, any questions, any comments, please hit us up in the comments. If you like what you're hearing, share it out. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell all the other musicians you know. Chicago Music Revealed here every day at 4 p.m. Monday through Friday. I'm Mike Jeffers, founder, host of Chicago Music Revealed. And on the show today, I am very pleased. Let me work my technology wizardry here. As I always say, as we're doing this, I'm the only one running the board. I'm the only one running the tech stuff here, so it is not as smooth as it used to be with the old show, but that's what happens during the quarantine situation we have happening here with COVID-19, so everybody's safe and healthy. Nobody here is in the studio with me, so I'm running everything myself. So when technology happens and there are problems, obviously, it is completely and totally my fault, but I can handle it, so that's okay. And there you go. Okay, so on the show today, and I'm going to bring him on right now, is Andy Milne. He has a brand new recording out called the reMission. It just came out in April, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about his fascinating career. And Andy, are you there?
I'm here. Andy Milne here.
Andy Milne, I'm happy to have you on the show. I was reading all about your bio, and I know I've seen you play. You must have been through Chicago with Robbie Coltrane at one point, probably more than one point, and I'm sure I saw you performing with him at the Jazz Showcase.
I don't think I've ever played in Chicago with Robbie. No, I don't think I ever played with Robbie.
No?
I never played the Showcase. I played a few times as a leader in different configurations, and I think the first time I came to Chicago was when I was at the Jazz Festival many years ago, playing with Carla Cook.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah.
And then I've been there with Ralph Alessi. I've been there with Jamie Baum, and I was supposed to be there next month with my trio, but that's not going to happen.
Where were you going to be with the trio?
At Constellation.
Oh, sure, yeah, geez, yeah. You know what? Before we talk about the new recording, the reMission, let's talk a little bit because you're on the East Coast, you're in New York, and let's talk a little bit about what's happening because of this entire situation that's happening, the COVID-19 situation. You know, here in Chicago, they just officially canceled all the festivals all the way through till the middle of June, which I can't see how they're not going to cancel all of the summer festivals, but I think they're piecemealing it in so they don't freak everybody out all at once. But I mean, you know, you just brought up a great point. You are going to be touring. You're going to be supporting this brand new recording. And how is this affecting? I mean, you're also an educator, so you're teaching. So I would imagine that everything's being moved online as well. I mean, how is this affecting, you know, your normal, you know, ability to create and also bring in revenue, obviously?
Well, I'm quite fortunate because I have a full-time position at the University of Michigan. So I've been pretty occupied in continuing that, you know, those responsibilities, but doing them remotely. I mean, our semester just ended, so that was why the timing of the tour was sort of just to be doing my teaching and then tour. But it's a revisioning in terms of how we mentor, and so that's been a challenge, and it's something we have to continue to examine in terms of how these distance models can best be utilized in an environment that really it doesn't lend itself. I mean, it's supported best by being in the same space as someone. I mean, you're trying to teach people how to play together. We just don't have the the technology that enables everybody without like significant internet connection to perform together simultaneously. So it's a difficult sort of leap to kind of deal with the way we, mentor young musicians in this music, in this particular environment. And that's aside from, I think, how everyone has sort of this aggregate of anxiety just around the circumstances that everyone's facing. So it's a tricky one,
Yeah, it is. It is. It's interesting. And by the way, University of Michigan, my favorite college, even though I didn't go there. My father went there, so go Blue.
Oh,
but,
did he?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He wasn't a musician, though. He was.
Okay.
But great school, great university, great music program. And, you brought up a great point, too, is because a lot of these colleges had to finish off their semester, obviously remotely, like what you just talked about. And I know a lot of people at U of I, know a lot of people at North Texas and at Berkeley, and they all had to go online, had to finish the classes and everything online. And, that connectivity is a key. And then bringing it back to your brand new recording, the reMission, like you said, you were going to be touring, and that really, regardless of all of our technology and all of our digital connectivity, for a group to put a recording out and then be able to go and support it and play in those different cities and establish relationships with that audience and have that connection night after night after night. And also, as you're performing this music, it obviously develops as you play night after night after night. Of
course.
What are some of the challenges of putting out a new recording in April, which you didn't plan on having the COVID-19 situation happen, but are you finding it that you're able to connect with more people digitally now and get more interviews and get more press and stuff going, but you can't get out and perform? Or is everything sort of slowed down as a standstill from putting this out now?
Well, I'd have to ask my publicist as far as like what her experience is like on the front lines as far as, but because every time we've had a conversation, it seems as though a lot of people in the larger music ecosystem are still endeavoring to do what they do in terms of being able to expose people to new releases and talk about music. There's obviously been there was a significant spate of really unfortunate, untimely, deaths that happened in the jazz community for sure. That people, we have to acknowledge those lost citizens in our community, and it's really devastating. So it's a sort of a odd time because I didn't plan to put a record out in this type of circumstance, and it's hard to sometimes even feel like in which way to best engage. So it took me a second to just maybe make an announcement amongst my sort of circle, even though the record had come out, because I think a lot of, because I'm very aware of the fact that I know a lot of fellow musicians around the country, but certainly in New York, particularly because of how difficult the things hit there, that are really scrambling, and that's quite real and very palpable.
Yeah.
It's a difficult thing to sort of wrap my head around, because I am one of several individuals, of course, that's affiliated with teaching institutions that's fortunate to have some income from that, and that's that's huge, But of course, in this day and age, musicians are generally, if they're not totally self-producing their entire recorded output, they're at least equal partners, if not, majority shareholders. So in my case, it's like I've funded a lot and invested a lot into recordings, this new one being no exception. So there's a difficult, kind of horizon as far as like how are you able to realize your investment if everyone's sort of kind of on lockdown like we are, So it's not a fun one. I'm just, like I said, and I repeat, I'm very fortunate and I feel happy and I'm lucky when my wife and I were safe or healthy, and so things kind of march on, but people have responded very positively in terms of when I sent an announcement out and said I got this new record out, and people like, yeah, it's awesome. I checked out the new promo video and I just bought it or just downloaded it, and congratulations, this is what people need. And it's rewarding to get that kind of response. And I realize not everybody's going to have space for it, but the people that do, it's fantastic, because ultimately that's what I have to work with. I mean, I might do some kind of living room concert, but it wouldn't be a trio concert.
Right. Yeah. That's one of those things. And I talking to Lydia Liebman, who is your publicist and a publicist of many of the artists. I had her on the show a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about, precisely what you're talking about is, you don't plan for this, but then you have to work your way through and you have to make things happen. And, to me as a musician, but also running a jazz magazine for 20 years, right now is a great time for people to put stuff out, because everybody is captive and they are listening and they are able to digest things and create more content around it and push it out. So, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show. I saw your promo video and I heard a couple of the tracks, but reading over everything, I'd love to get into the concept of you putting this recording together, because you have done a lot of large projects. You've done film projects. You've toured with many different musicians as sideman, and then you also put recordings out as a leader. But this is your first trio recording. I think it said that you've been, performing and touring for over 25 years. So your first trio recording, what was the motivation behind finally just doing a trio recording?
Sort of twofold. For probably at least a decade, if not a little bit longer, I've had, close musician friends that have been pestering me, man, come on, make a trio record, and to the degree that they've, one of them, fellow pianist, friend from France, Benoit Delbecq, he was like, man, I'll produce it for you. Like, everybody's just been sort of, needling me to do this for a long time, and I've always said, yeah, you're right. I know, I need to do it. It's next, and life would just bumble along, and I never found myself quite committing to it. It's a really kind of it's a sort of an identifying kind of structure and configuration that I think pianists in the jazz environment really, it's sort of in other ways I think that sometimes defines someone's sound, or at least it's someplace that often people are introduced to a pianist in that configuration, or maybe perhaps a quartet where the piano trio is still kind of engine that's sort of driving the group in a lot of ways. And so I've played in trios in rhythm sections in lots of different configurations, but the emphasis is oscillating, of course. And so that sort of self-awareness of like, yeah, this is something I want to do and think about. It's like, because a lot of times when you're in the other groups, you're playing in trio settings when you're the soloist, but it's still not the same in terms of how you carry the narrative when it really is the focus of those three individuals. So I felt, it was coming, and then for me it was so twofold. As I said, like I had health issues that kind of derailed my otherwise current trajectory at the time in like 2017, and so I just had to reconsider everything in my life, and as part of that reconsideration, I just thought, this has been staring me in the face, and I have these close friends who've been saying, man, why aren't you doing a trio recording? And it just sort of became very crystal clear, like, okay, there's the simplification, here's the redirection or the reMission as it ended up becoming, in terms of the title, and in terms of my health, I was like, okay, I got to really think about where I'm headed here. And so it just was sort of the natural, kind of accepting, yeah, this is the time, and I think it's a good time, and I'm enthusiastic about it. And yes, I maybe I required some sort of external motivation, but it's not like I didn't want to do it. I just sort of I always seem to find these other opportunities that were either gaining steam or would get presented to me, and it's like, well, I kind of pour myself all in, and therefore I put something else off that it felt maybe more optional.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, as a educator, touring musician, you could be thinking that you're going to do a trio recording, and then like what you said, hey, do you want to go on a tour? We're going to go tour Europe. Okay, yeah, I mean, things change, right? Or here's the film score, or something will pop up. I thought you
Yeah.
found something pretty interesting. What you said in that in your description of that is that as a piano player, the trio recording almost defines your sound. And I was going to bring up, because I know that when you're performing and you're writing and you're composing, and you have larger ensembles you're recording and composing for, the ability for you to really expand your voice improvisationally is probably more limited than in a trio recording. And that's something that I think is interesting, because when you brought up the fact that it almost defines your voice, do you think it's because you actually are like really more like out there at that point, right? You don't have all these safety nets. It's you are playing piano with two other guys. That's it. And you're playing your compositions or your reimagined versions of legendary compositions. Is that kind of the direction that you're thinking? Because I mean, it's you, right? There's no safety net. It's you.
You're super exposed, and I mean, the funny thing is, I've had like 2 different duo projects over the years, and that's technically even more exposed.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's something with duos where there's a continuum that maybe exists in a slightly different way, because it's these 2 people walking down the street, kind of continually talking in a certain way, where the sharing is different, and of course the instrumentation would depend on depending on the instrumentation, it might be radically different type of conversation. But the duos that I've done, it's been more about this continuous statement. And I think in a piano trio in jazz, because it's such this this venerable institution in a way, you can't really look at it without kind of that sort of homage and regard to sort of almost like sanctity to this thing,
Mm-hmm.
And so whether it is a matter of, I think, personalizing the sort of traditional roles that exist or that have existed, or at least taking them into consideration from the point of view of the history of the music and the practitioners and the sort of the icons of the music that we celebrate. I'm just speaking, on behalf of the members of the trio in a way, because it's like we each have, artists that we have fashioned around their work, or an aggregate of people's work, and so a lot of that happens in trio settings, or as rhythm section players, we have this sort of kind of almost duty-bound relationship to playing together and playing in ensembles of many sizes, whether
Mm-hmm.
it be a trio or quartet, or all the way through to a large ensemble, big band or something. So it's something that I think we're always aware of. Like, I mean, as an educator, I tend to tell my students of any instrumentation, I want them to think like they're a rhythm section player, even though they may not think that they're traditionally a member of the rhythm section. I sort of demand them to sort of strap on that hat and think that way. So it's sort of an ongoing relationship that I think I've been lucky in most of the bands I've played in that tends to exist. But for sure, when you sort of put piano, bass, and drums in that setting, you have to think about the whole history of the music. It's just too almost iconic of a sound. That said, with that huge responsibility, there's still everything that you want to bring to it. And for me, because I've done so many of these different projects over the years, I'm bringing along all the lessons that I've learned from those endeavors. And
Mm-hmm.
if I think back to my earliest gigs and projects that I started when I was just in school or just coming out of school, a lot of those things were trios, or maybe a quartet. But if I think back to how I was approaching it, it's like I was at the beginning of my journey, and I didn't have the perspective that I have now, because I've done these other things. So for me, I know I did it slightly in reverse in maybe some ways, but I do bring to it, I guess, a different orchestral sensibility, having filtered through all these different groups of varying size.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you talking kind of furthering that thought process. when I was listening to a couple of the tunes, and one of the ones when you're talking about legendary trios or legendary piano players in trios, Mccoy Tyner's Passion Dance.
Mm-hmm.
That's a reimagined. I mean, it's reimagined the version that you were playing. I think just from a rhythmic standpoint and changes standpoint, I'm not sure because I'm a drummer, so you would be way more adept at telling me if you reharmonize something. But
you're perpetuating a stereotype here, Mike.
hey,
Come on.
Hey, I can sit up and I can hold sticks, so that's okay. but the Mccoy Tyner's Passion Dance, that's a reimagined. But I mean, you went all in here. You're playing McCoy, you're recording a McCoy Tyner tune on a trio recording, but it's reimagined. I mean, is that how you looked at some of these tunes that some of that, not your originals, but some of the, shall we call it standards or cover tunes that you put on the recording, you reimagined them. So they had a fresh taste to them or a fresh feel to them rather than just kind of like playing them, in a really nice way, but standard, in a standard style.
Well, I mean, I think that's kind of how I get through life. Like I tend to, you could be standing waiting to go through security at the airport with me, and I'll be thinking about another way. Not to try to avert security, of course, right. But just thinking of which line is the fastest line. Or
better clarify that.
yeah. But I mean, But what I was saying is, like, so my mind just tends to work that way, where I'm always kind of going, well, you could do that. And I'm always looking for an option. And I think, when I hear of course, it's a slippery slope when you start tackling the music of really celebrated artists. I think to one of my earlier recordings when I did a cover of a Joni Mitchell piece. Now, Joni, Monk, Mccoy, Duke, these kind of artists, sometimes they have this sacred ground where we think, oh, we can't really, you got to be careful if you touch that,
Mm-hmm.
Often people get a little upset if you start tinkering and painting the walls and having your way with the aesthetic of these things that are sort of revered,
Mm-hmm.
And so it's sometimes it's a risky endeavor, and I think for me, I do tend to try to honor that, but I mean, I haven't done, most of my recorded output has not been interpretive work when it comes to me as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I mean, I think when I'm listening to something like that tune, I mean, what being drawn into playing Passion Dance, I mean, there's something that it's like if you listen to a piece of music on the radio, you're in the car, and you're humming along, but in maybe part of your brain, you're hearing your version of it. Now, your version of it is it's not maybe fully developed at that point because you're just driving down the road, but it's kind of informed by all the things that make you tick, and all the music that you've studied and all the music that you've had the opportunity to play. And so it's, I've been fortunate to have played with artists that are, confident and deft at doing these kinds of things. So they've been a huge influence on me making my own attempts in going in that direction, where I'm going to make interpretations that are individual.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think a lot of times, especially in the institutionalized setting around the study of jazz, there's a tendency to maybe easily default, and for some valid reasons, as far as like the ease in which you can say, here's an illustration, now play that. I think there's a tendency to maybe cover things, and covering in the jazz shouldn't necessarily mean literally covering, like that sounds like a Led Zeppelin cover band, right. That sounds like a Beatles cover band. Like it should be interpretive, and I think great music really holds the capacity to be interpreted. If you think of Stevie Wonder's music, you think of the number of ways in which people have interpreted it. You think of the Beatles' music, you think of the number of ways their music is being interpreted. Think of Bach even. I mean, there was a period when I was growing up, everybody was doing Bach, but it was like all over the spectrum, from like these cheesy pop things and almost disco. Like great music, it's resilient. You don't hear a lot of covers of bad music.
No, you're right.
Unless it's Weird Al or someone like that,
Well, you're
I think it's just that resilience that makes it something that you can do things with, because it's so well constructed to begin with.
That's a great point, and just taking it a little farther. I mean, that's why everyone loves that's why there's standards, right? That's why when you walk in somewhere, there's standards, because you can play them all sorts of different ways, but it's a good piece of music. It's a good composition. So people want to put their own take on it. People get inspired by listening to it and are able to create off of that. That's a great point. I never really thought about it in those simple terms and then taking it to another level. But that's a great way to say it.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it was, I didn't know that the history of it wasn't so foreshadowing our history in doing this, but I mean, because we've been toying around with playing Passion Dance for, I guess now at this point it's been 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, of course, it was very unfortunate timing, and Mccoy had just passed too. But he was a huge influence on me and inspiration in so many different ways, and I mean, not just me, but like a whole generations of musicians, and particularly pianists. That was just fun to be able to have. It was fun to be able to explore that piece, and it was difficult to find our way. Even when I'd sort of come up with the arrangement, it was still difficult to find the way that arrangement was going to work.
Yeah, and I mean, you've probably played it 1,000 times, so there's still that challenge in figuring out how the arrangement can work and how it flows, and it probably also has something to do with the guys that you're recording with and performing in your trio on this. Why don't we talk a little bit about the drummer and the bass player? I'm familiar with the drummer, obviously, but
Clarence Penn.
But I mean the bass player, I'm not that familiar with, but looking through his resume, he's played with tons of people. Obviously, are these guys?
John Bears.
Yeah,
he's played with tons of people. I mean, like he's played. And speaking of trios, he's played in some pretty incredible, iconic trios. He currently plays with Fred Hirsch in his trio.
Yeah.
He's played with Andrew Hill. He's played. He's a slew of people, and then kind of weaving from, I don't want to say the political spectrum in jazz, but from the point of view of the aesthetic spectrum, and he's crossed over in both camps, and he's pretty deft in either zone, as is Clarence,
Mm-hmm.
and so they're a joy to play with. I think of the first gig that we did when I didn't really have any material, and it was just this amazing first date.
Mm-hmm.
That was I just was beaming, going, "Oh man, this is awesome."
How important is it? I mean, okay, so all of the rest of your band brings all of these experiences. You have all of these experiences. You're composing, and you've got original compositions on this recording, and it's one thing to compose and write for a specific recording. Are you writing for a specific group when you're doing that as well, meaning for the specific musicians, or do you just write because you're inspired and then you bring it in, and then it organically, the other guys are able to contribute to it?
It's a little bit of both, but I mean, ultimately, I suppose the ideal is really writing for this group, and certainly the individuals make a part of that whole. And so I might not necessarily think, okay, this line particularly, or this figure particularly, has got Clarence written all over it, or got John written all over it. But at the same time, I'm aware of what they like to do, or what they're capable of doing, or what they're curious about doing. And so I'm trying to write to sort of, captivate those skills and curiosities, because one thing I've learned over the years of being a band leader is that if something's not working, you might have to, at least the first line of defense is to ask if you're the reason why it's not working. And I've often been, had to accept, like, okay, I can't get the best out of this person, or I haven't figured out how to get the best out of this particular person, and therefore that's why this isn't working. I mean, sometimes people just fire you and move on,
mm-hmm.
because they're like, well, you're not what I'm looking for, which is fine. I mean, but you imagine if you did that in your personal relationships, the divorce rate would be even worse than it is. I mean, at some point you have to kind of be able to go, you know what, I haven't figured out how to get the best of this person. It's not saying I haven't, failed miserably or tried and just said, okay, I'm going to try someone else, but there's a degree of being able to understand that you, as the band leader or the composer, are trying to find the best, to bring the best out of those components and bring the best out of those individuals. And for me, with this group, it took me a second, because I I had been writing for my other band, Tap Theory, for 20 years, and I was very seasoned in a way of constructing music for that group, even though for the group that the personnel had changed over the years because people had gone on and do other bands and moved on, and I had to sort of rebuild every couple of years, and there'd be this kind of cascading effect where there's this person had never played with that person, but then it's just sort of overlapping tenure, but I got really used to writing for that band. And so when I started writing for the Unison Trio, I was sort of still, part of my brain was like, hadn't quite figured out how to make this transition. And so the first few pieces that I was writing weren't really right it's not so much the players, it was just for the configuration and for what the band was really, destined to be in a way. And so that first attempt at recording this album, I just shelved all that music because it didn't make sense for what we were as a group. I remember playing, a couple of the roughs for some close friends, just like, what do you think? They were like, yeah, there's something missing. There's like, it sounds like almost as though there was we needed a foil, and we didn't have a foil. And I'm like, well, but it's, it's a trio, so that's not going to work because there would be a quartet if it was a foil. So I had to rethink what it meant to write for the trio. And, it was an interesting lesson, but I'm happier that I took the time to do that, because then I felt like this organism, and we had a chance to go on the road and kind of tweak some of the things, initial ideas, but then it comes out. And it might sound like, oh God, this guy has no idea how to write for three people, but it's more subtle than that. Of course I could have written music that could be played for three people and did, but it's not that sort of linear. It's much more nuanced, where there's, I guess, a way of drawing out the relationships, because I always want to make sure that everybody's, fully engaged. And so how we share the emphasis of something, or how we share the emphasis of the through line, and where we create the possibilities and openings so that that through line can be shared is really important to me. Because then, as much as you're exposed, and everybody's exposed, but as a pianist, if we go back to the earlier part of the conversation, as much as I feel as exposed as a pianist, when we're sharing that, I'm now able to do some of the things that I love doing when I'm in these other larger groups, where I may not be the feature, I may not be the spotlight isn't on me all the time, and I don't want it to be. I like the fact that because there's some things that I love doing the most is accompanying and interacting. So that gives me an opportunity to kind of fine tune how we do that as a group.
Yeah, well, it's. There's so much interaction happening in the trio setting to begin with, but on this recording, there's a lot of interaction happening back and forth, and it seems like there's a lot of input from the other guys, and you can see what's happening, and I can hear you're playing, but you're also playing off of what Clarence might be doing, and off. It's an organic feel, but I think that, you tell me, the more you guys play these tunes, it'll continuously change, and that's one thing you can't do right now, obviously, because of the current situation. But that's really when you're composing. To me, when you walk into a recording studio, here's what it is, but in 6 months, if you guys are playing all the time, it's going to be probably fairly different. But that's why everybody should go out and see live performances, so that you can get the feel on the recording and then go and see it live. But that's the organic process, right?
Yeah, it's the sort of the frailty of humanity. And the frailty of improvisation. Because of course, if we were playing music that was to be performed precisely the same way every night, like Broadway or something, or a lot of classical music, there's people have the capacity to do that. But this music, its sort of signature is the fact that it is going to be organic, and it is going to evolve, and it's going to have this very immediate responsiveness to that moment, to that room, to that instrument, to that audience, to that dinner, to that travel day. And so those things are, that's what makes everybody's experience unique, and consequently every audience's interaction experience with live music in this domain so special and so fragile, because two friends could be nattering back and forth. Oh man, I saw them in Milwaukee, and then I saw them in Chicago. Wow, it was totally not happening. And then it's like, oh, are you kidding me? This was incredible. Like, you could have that variance just based upon those 2 days. And like, oh yeah, you know why? Because they drove like an extra 10 hours that day, and they were bagged. or could have been vice versa, right? Could have been that, oh, we only had to drive an hour and a half, and we've got a little slack.
Mm-hmm.
Cyrus Chestnut telling a funny story that involved Clarence, actually, at the Jazz Congress this year. He was talking about playing with Betty Carter, and Cyrus was telling this story about how they'd gone to some spa that day, and Betty could tell, because she could tell that they'd had this, like they were a little soft. They didn't have this intensity. It was like they got a little too pampered at the spa or something like this, because they had a day off or something. And I know it's a funny story, but it's like, yeah, you can hear these things because, of course, we are going to play these experiences. So I mean, it's hard not having that outlet, and I don't know how it's. It's not going to be a light switch that gets flipped back on, and it's so I know that this tour is not happening officially. I was sort of in denial. Just this morning, I was online canceling all the hotel reservations I had for the tour, because I'm like, yeah, it's definitely not happening, and I think at this point I will likely rebook it for far enough in the future that it's COVID proof, I think.
Yeah.
But of course we don't know how our venues are going to fare in this whole downtime thing, because this is not these are not all institutions that have a robust financial what's the word I'm looking for?
Well, they're running on thin margins.
They're running on thin margins anyway. Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, that's something that I've been talking about, and I also think that any venue that opens up in 2020 is going to have massive capacity caps on it, which is like, okay, if you can have 100 people in there, you can probably only have 20. Depending on what's happening, and it's going to be one of those things.
It's like the economy of scale doesn't. It's like it doesn't make sense, because you can't, unless you're just not going to pay anybody.
Right.
Or people are going to pay $150 a head. Like I don't know that that's,
I know.
Sometimes the music puts a capacity cap on it.
Right.
All by itself. But I mean, I was joking with a good friend, a musician friend, because I was kind of, I have all these other interests, it may be obvious at this point, but like one of the things I'm interested in, and I've been doing a lot of research until we got locked down, but I mean, like here at the University of Michigan, in terms of working with music and healing, and directly working with practitioners who are in medicine and public health and different areas that can, that we can engage as partners. And one of the things, because I think that this is a big part of the last record I did 2 years ago with my band App Theory, but I think the idea of music as like medicine in this direct way, like I was just envisioning some sort of utopian future where it was almost as though your doctor said, yeah, you need to go take in 2 sets of Andy Milne in unison tonight, and then I think you'll be, you know what I mean? Like I'm sort of jokingly saying this, but on some level I'm imagining that there'd just be almost like this prescription for wellness where you could go take something in, and it would be this direct, kind of physiological response that people could be more, I guess, actionable, rather than, I think right now, because we have so much content, I don't know whether we're able to do the math for ourselves. I think we're a little spoiled in the fact that we have so much content coming at us in so many directions. I worry that we are desensitized a little bit in the fact that we can bounce from this to that in just a couple of clicks. and so it's worrisome in some regard. I mean, it's very inspiring in a lot of ways, but it's worrisome in some regard because it's like, well, are we able to go deep, and are we able to really just stop, be here, and take it in?
Mm-hmm.
And there's something interesting about this, lockdown right now that perhaps is giving people that appreciation. And if it is, I mean, nice byproduct, I suppose, aside from all the other, negatives that we're having to sort of dig ourselves out of, but that'd be a nice byproduct because I think the arts are extremely important, not just music, right? Like performing arts are extremely important to our sense of community, to our sense of well-being, to our mental development. And I don't think in general that in the United States, I mean, I'm from Canada, and I would say that definitely exists, the same pattern exists there, is that, sports is the religion. It's not, we're, as a whole, I mean, people like you and I love music, but on the whole, it's not placed in high regard in our society. It's not, the NEA is not getting more funding than the military, let's say.
Right.
Like here at the University of Michigan, I'm pretty sure there's a big stadium down the street that probably is a bigger line item than the School of Music, Theater, Dance.
Yeah.
So I understand that that's where our society is and has been for a very long time, and it's probably, certainly in the U.S., I could imagine it's like you think of the foundation of the country, and there's something the frontierism of the country that has a certain amount of aggression in a way that sports fulfills.
Mm-hmm.
And music doesn't do that. I mean, there may be energetic and aggressive musical passages, or there may be a sparring scene in in an opera or something, or a theatrical piece, but it doesn't come across. I don't think it fuels the same thing in the human spirit. So it does something much different for us. And the thing I really do hope that somehow we are able to sort of take this moment to have it bring a closer appreciation to one of the very things that we're missing out on right now, right? Because of course people are missing out on sports as well, but whether there's a newfound appreciation, I would love to see that, not just for selfish reasons, but I think it would be a wonderful gift to humanity.
I think it's healthy, right? I think that what you're describing and talking about, and we've written articles in Chicago Jazz Magazine, and actually one of the CD reviewers, CDs, one of the new recording reviewers, that, as we call it now, because what's CD, but he's actually a brain surgeon at the University of Chicago, and he reviews CDs because it's his way of getting his mind relaxed by listening to music, and he loves it, right? So I mean, and I asked him one time, he's like, Mike, when you're doing what I'm doing 60 hours a week, I need to sit down and I need to listen to some jazz, and that is my outlet. That's what I like to write about, and that's what I like to listen to and talk to. But it's a healthy situation, right? And what you're talking about is the same thing. Is during this pause, shall we call it, everything's stopped. I think more people are going to be conscious of what they're missing, but also hopefully they'll consume something maybe on social media, some of these live concerts, some of these streams, and find an artist that they never knew about. So there's a lot of pluses there too, but then get away from the technology and just sit and consume the artist, because you're at home, you have time, you don't have to go and meet friends at a restaurant because there's no restaurants open. So good news. So I think it's gonna go both ways. But before we wrap up, and I know I mentioned this to you before we hopped on, I wanted to bring this up, and this is a perfect segue because it comes up with part of your teaching philosophy, and I watched one of your videos that you have on your website. You're talking about the fact that people are flipping all the time and cutting through stuff and everything, but they're not in the boredom, right? They're not figuring out, they're not thinking, essentially, is what I think you're talking about. So talk a little bit about that, because that, I'm sure you're probably, telling this and passing it on to your students, but I thought it was a great way to describe it and talk a little bit about that.
It's not that they're not thinking. It's just that people are afraid of boredom, and that's when the phone comes out and you start doing something. The thing that very moment is sort of has been lost, essentially, is that when you have the inception of this, what we would consider boredom is the very moment when you can have a creative solution, and you begin to problem solve, and you begin to dream, and you begin to wonder how you could do a different arrangement on Mccoy Tyner's Passion Dance or whatever. Like if you think certain generations of kids played outside, and if they didn't have toys, they made them. It sort of becomes this sort of imagination, and the imagination, if you especially you'd hear this thing, I'm sure you probably, it's an off sort of quoted parental statement. Kid says, "I'm bored," and the parent says, you can come up with something, and I think we run the risk of sort of sacrificing our capacity to invent and collaborate and see the invisible when we are sort of discouraged from being bored. Oh, well, just sort of throw something in front of you to keep you pacified in a way.
Mm-hmm.
It's like this sort of mobile over everybody's adult crib that just keeps them from being distracted from just kind of going, well, you could think of something else. Do you really need that mobile there to keep you distracted from your own imagination? And so the thinking is just sort of being muted a little bit, because it's not even the thinking, it's the exploring.
Mm-hmm.
And so the exploring that we do, we go off down these rabbit holes, but and that's some sort of there's definitely brain activity there. I'm not suggesting that people aren't thinking in that regard, but I think it's the critical thinking exercise, and it's the problem solving exercise, and sort of inventing and dreaming and these types of things that really I think it's vital to human existence. And I think the people that have done it on a high level have helped change. They've changed humanity, either by the way we function.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could think of Bill Gates as someone who's like got that capacity. Now he's also contributed to giving us technology that has contributed to some people maybe, avoiding boredom, but that wasn't his intention. But I mean, that kind of mind, right? So it's like, but it changes humanity. These things happen. I mean, like, sometimes it's for the best. Sometimes it's maybe have sinister purposes historically, certainly in this world.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that doesn't change the fact that we, I guess, have this capacity, and each of us sort of, maybe sometimes it just seems like too much effort, but I definitely think that, the sort of stigma around boredom is unfortunate, because, like I can think of it like just countless times where I might have been, having a great thought just from going to the bathroom, or going to do something completely benign, where you're like, hey, you know what?
Mm-hmm.
You're at a meeting, you're sitting around a conference table, and you're like problem solving, and you're thinking, excuse me, I gotta go to the bathroom. And you come back, and you're like, you burst in the room, you're like, I was thinking, and it's like that kind of stuff. It's like, what are you going to do? You're not, most people generally not are going to pull their phone out when in the public restroom, right? So like,
yeah, right.
So you're pondering something, and I think that's awesome,
Mm-hmm.
So just being bored for a sec, and then go, hey, what if,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a really valuable thing. So that's, I guess, what I was sort of going at in that video that you're referring to, because it was actually a chapter in a colleague's book that she interviewed me for, that was tapping into, like, how does a musician's mind and a music educator, and it's just sort of intersectionality of my life, like how do those things, how do we address boredom, and how does it relate,
Mm-hmm.
So that's thanks for checking that out. But that's sort of where that came from, in terms of thinking about boredom not as a negative.
Well, it's interesting. You and I could talk about this subject for a long time, because I'm passionate about it. I read a lot of different things. Psycho-cybernetics is one of the books that I read a lot of, and
Wow.
It comes down to, I'm never bored, because I'm always thinking about stuff, and I don't have to look at stuff. It's like when I hear somebody say, "Oh man, I'm so bored," I'm like, I have no concept of how that could be happening. So I'm the wrong person to talk to about. Shut your eyes and think about, for 5 seconds, and you're going to start to come up with different ideas. So when I heard you say that, I was like, that's something that I love hearing, but I hadn't heard it quite the way you were describing it. So that's why I wanted to bring that up. But so we should tell everyone to head over to andymilne.com to pick up the new recording, the reMission, right? That is out and it's streaming. I'm sure it's on Spotify, Apple, everywhere you can pick something.
You can find it in all those usual suspects. You can find it directly for me and all the other spots, yes.
And for updates when something actually is able to start happening with live performances, visit andymilne.com as well, because that's the only place you're going to hear about it.
And I mean, I do some of the stuff they call social media there. I mean, I am less engaged in that world than perhaps I ought to be. But if you did feel, inspired to go to my website, you could subscribe. I don't blast people in their inbox very, very much. I keep it pretty conservative, but you can subscribe, and then that way I know what city you're in, so you don't have to give me your address. I don't ask for your address, but if you give me your city, then I know if I'm coming to your city. Sure. I can tell you.
Yeah. No.
So I have it set up that way so that hopefully it's people can appreciate that I'm not trying to blow up their inbox, but I just want to let them know what they would want to know, which I'm assuming is, when I'm performing near them. And hopefully I think I'll probably postpone it till like basically just put it off by a year, because I think that's probably easy, mathematics for me to just sort of go, well, would have been right around now, but next year.
Well, and also you brought up Bill Gates, and I'm listening to a lot of Bill Gates these days because of the vaccine situation, and that's kind of where he's heading with this too. And he's somebody that knows because of his work with his foundation. So yeah,
exactly.
So that's one of those.
That documentary on Netflix is excellent.
Yeah. Oh man, jeez. See, we could talk about that too, but
yeah.
Hey, I really appreciate the time. We spent more time than I thought we were going to, but it was fascinating discussion, and hopefully we will touch base when something gets announced, you're coming through Chicago, or anytime you have something new popping up, let's touch base, because this was a fascinating conversation, and we can keep it going. And hopefully we'll see you live here in Chicago, maybe in 2021 or a little bit sooner than that, God willing.
Yeah, well, that'd be fantastic. I mean, I am sort of now a Midwest transplant, so it's a little easier for me to come to Chicago than it was before.
That's right. That's right. Well, thanks for taking the time. AndyMilne.com. We are going to link everything up there and push this out on all of our platforms. And Andy, thanks so much again, and congratulations on the new recording.
All right, thank you very much.
All right,
Have
take
a good
care.
Day,
you too.
Be safe. Thanks.
Thanks. You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
That was a great conversation, Andy Milne. I'll tell you. He and I could talk for probably 2 more hours about what we were talking about there, because I'm very passionate about the thought process, about not being bored, about thinking, about putting thoughts down, about creating, about taking time to just sit and relax and, get a feel for what's happening. So hearing his philosophy, hearing his thought process on this, and of course the new recording, the reMission, check it all out, andymilne.com. Fantastic stuff. So it's a Monday, man. It's a Monday. So I'm going to announce tomorrow, 4 p.m. We're going to be back here, but I'm going to announce the guest for tomorrow, and for Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. We're getting things organized here. All of the past shows are up on ChicagoMusicRevealed.com. And then they also go out on IGTV, Chicago Jazz Magazine's IGTV. We're scheduled to have Will Phelan on this week. He is a singer, songwriter, composer, educator from Chicago. He's in the pop rock field, so that's going to be a fascinating conversation. Also, Shonda Brooks is going to be on a little later this week. She actually is running and started and founded Windy Fest. This is going to be the third annual Windy Fest coming up in November, so we're going to keep our fingers crossed that we can have that happen. Actually, it's supposed to happen at the Epiphany Center for the Arts. So lots of fingers crossed on that. And plus we have a few more surprises coming up. And hit me up, leave me a message. I want to get your feedback on this. Do you like the 4 p.m. time slot? Or should I push it maybe to 5 p.m.? And that would be more convenient. I'm inching it along. I'm trying to find that sweet spot when everybody's hanging out, so we can all have a good conversation and interact back and forth and have good engagement, because in a couple of weeks, we're going to be up running with a couple of other platforms and a couple of other features. And I want to take some phone calls. I think I want to take some phone calls in a couple of weeks. We'll have a live phone-in conversation so we can call in. I'll put the number up and, we'll text in and then we'll call you back and we'll make something happen. So, but leave me a comment, shoot me an email, send me a DM. Anybody that you think should be on the show, be sure to let me know. We are scheduling out 2, 3, 4 weeks in advance now. It's great that this show's taking off, and we are starting to reach into all the different genres. So again, thanks for watching. Now I got to dial this thing in. I gotta get this thing happening here. Where is it? Here it comes. Boom. All right, the theme song. So thanks to Craig Pilo for the theme song. I want to thank everyone for watching, everyone checking this out. And again, tell your friends, tell your family, call the grandkids, share this out, make sure everybody knows about it. And I will see you back here tomorrow at 4 p.m. Stay safe, stay healthy, and go listen to some music. I'll see you tomorrow.